Yo, what up, y'all? It's your boy D Will. I'm back at it again. Another episode of the D Will Show. Episode 111. Got 111 in. That's crazy to me. Um, but today I got a good one for y'all. Today I tapped in with my guy, Fourth Man Podcast, Big Three Podcast. If you don't already, go check him out. Um, if you haven't already, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Let's see, Apple, Spotify, all that good stuff. Like my guys here already. Bring my guy in. My guy.
What's good, my bro? How's it going?
I'm good, bro. How are you?
And I'm good. Just coming off the holiday season, so
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
For sure. You can hear me good? Let me fix my camera.
Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we all good. Let me just get my camera right. I know my thing be acting a little iffy.
All right, you're good.
All right. My guy, so how was your holiday weekend, bro? I appreciate you, joining me, bro. I know when I hit you up, it was definitely something I had in mind for a while, but your timing right. So I just want to make sure, he was good. So I appreciate you for tuning in with me, bro.
Man, I appreciate you asking me. Honestly, it's an honor. I enjoy the pod, but yeah, no, the holidays were good. Just spent some time with some family. I was up in the mountains over there in East Tennessee, so we were chilling. It was cool. How was yours?
Man, it was good, bro. It was good. We kind of fell back a little bit, with everything going on in the world with the flu and COVID and RSV. So it was just me and mom, really. I didn't really do too much, but I still enjoyed it, man.
Hey, that's still cool. You and mom. Um,
For sure.
I got a single mom too, so I feel that. Sometimes it's just good to have some alone time.
For sure. Man, Brody, like I said, you have a podcast also, so you kind of know how it go as far as, talking to people and, reaching out to people and stuff like that. But for you, bro, I kind of want to start from the beginning. For you, how was your upbringing for you? And how'd you get involved in falling in love with sports and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's actually pretty crazy. My dad always thought I wouldn't actually like sports from an early age,
Mm-hmm.
and my biggest hobby, if anything. But yeah, I mean, nothing too crazy. Middle class family. Went to a relatively like big high school, at least for the area. And I wasn't really sure like what I wanted to do in college, but I knew I loved sports. I had an affinity for it, and going to college, I wanted to be a sports journalist. So I went and got my communications degree, and right out of college, I was doing a little bit of writing for the local newspaper there, just covering some high school games, and quickly realized I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know, this journalism thing is really for me. Like, I don't enjoy writing for the paper that much. Deadlines are stressful. I used to be like cover games and go to like Starbucks or McDonald's, be in the parking lot, like typing out like my articles and stuff. So I went crazy about it. But what I did like, because I went to school in East Tennessee, it's called University of Tennessee Chattanooga. I don't know who all familiar with it, but what I did like was giving a lot of exposure to people that were really good that I didn't feel like necessarily had a big stage to perform on. So I wanted to somehow continue to cover sports a little bit, and ended up maybe right after college, maybe a couple years after I graduated, moved to Atlanta. And I was like, man, like I was blogging a little bit. I was covering the big three just a little bit from a blog perspective, but I wanted to do something more. And podcasting was obviously big. I wanted to talk about it, convey what I was actually trying to say through words. So my first podcast was actually during the inception of the Alliance of American Football, which was one of the first spring leagues that ended up going debunked. And I got a good opportunity to cover the Atlanta Legends. A lot of early growth, got to do the podcast with my childhood friend. We were kind of experimenting. But the biggest thing there was I just didn't want to do another podcast that was about the NFL and NBA and just be another take.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be different. And I ended up doing that. Things were going well. And kind of towards the end of the season, ultimately like suspending operations, I was like, man, I really enjoy the big three still. I was still blogging about it at that time. Let me just start a podcast separately from that, or see if I can tie it in somehow, and just kind of like maybe work on it when the season ends. So I started doing that a little bit. Ultimately, we know how it goes. AAF ended up folding, and I was like, I'm just going to put my eggs all into this one basket. And man, that was 2018, I would say. And here we are 4 years later, getting to cover the league, meet a lot of people, and it's just been a fun ride.
Now, how did you hear about the Big Three, bro? I know it's kind of still somewhat new because they had a COVID year.
for sure.
But for you, when it really jumped off, like how did you first hear about it and what made you want to get, you know what I mean, work alongside the big three?
Yeah, a couple reasons of why I want to jump in. So I heard about it probably just through like social media. I think it was social media. I'd come across something on Twitter.
Hmm.
Um, it was some kind of news article or something that came out. Like I was creating a basketball league, this 3-on-3 league. I was like, oh, that's dope. That's super cool. Like something innovative, something different. Like I'd like to watch that and see how it is.
Hmm.
And then I saw big names early on, the Kenyon Martins, the Allen Iversons, the Rashard Lewis's. I was like, oh, like they're getting some like decent little players. Okay, like these are like some big time names in the NBA and guys that can still hoop. They're just a little bit older. So like, I was interested. Obviously, I think everyone's first impression is like this is an old man's league, or it's for guys that can't run up and down the court. But I just really enjoyed it, bro. Like right off the rip, to be honest, it's like guys that like I don't feel like I appreciated it enough when I was younger, and ended up over time like just getting to watch more of their game over time. So there was that aspect of it, big names and the innovation that Ice Cube was bringing. But then just kind of going back to what I was saying before, it was something new and something I was like, man, I could maybe be one of the first people to like cover this and get started with it, and just try to create my own my own pathway rather than just being like another take for something else. So yeah, that's how I ended up finding out about it. I would say season one was more of like my experimental time where I'm like, do I like this? Do I not? Ended up, really liking it. In season two, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna try to write about it, and then yeah, podcast season three.
Okay, now for you, was it something that you like, I'm trying to think of how to word it. So like I'm trying to think of how to word this properly. I have it written down, but it's gonna sound weird. So like basically what I'm trying to say is when you saw that the big three was coming out and you wanted to, it kind of was in your lane of what you wanted to do. Was it more of I'm just gonna take a chance on it, just see how I like it, or was it more of like let me get in contact with somebody from the big three and see if they'll be willing to let me have a podcast that kind of goes hand in hand with the big three?
Yeah, it was more of just to see if I like it. I would say like I never
Hmm.
had, I'll be honest, like with the first podcast I did, I had a little bit of hesitancy in
Hmm.
trying to do with another like new startup league. Like we just see
Yeah.
how these are going, and I was like, man, I don't want to get my heart broken again. And
Yeah.
even with like, there's been a lot of success, but it's been a little bit of roller coaster at some times. So I was a little unsure about it, but I was like, with the big three, they used to have this guy Oliver Maroney. He was kind of the Woj of the big three.
Hmm.
Was one of the very first employees of the big three, and he actually had a podcast. So they were doing some of those things early on. I don't know. I don't remember it being like super consistent. Maybe I could be wrong, but they actually had a podcast. I feel like he was doing it with like one of the players, if not somebody else.
Hmm.
And so I happened into that stuff too. And kind of the reason I went with the blogging avenue. But then, as his role became bigger within the big three and he kind of stepped away from podcasting more, I wanted to kind of take a little bit of a different spin on it. Not just being like an inside perspective necessarily, someone that's tied with the league, but that's an outside perspective, a voice of the people, essentially, not only for the players, but the community that we were building within the big three. So,
Got you.
yeah, I wanted to take that route and kind of just not necessarily be tied to something where felt like I had to be like careful with my words or like careful with what I say.
Okay. Okay. Um, for you, what is your take on how big the big three has grown? You know what I mean? Like as far as the players they're getting, they've had a lot of big names that you named. They added the celebrity game, stuff like that. Like what has been your whole take of from when you started from the beginning to where it is now?
Man, it's crazy. I mean, a lot of growth. It's a niche league, so
Yeah.
growth is a little bit slow, maybe than like other sports league. But you have to remember, like, other sports leagues too. They didn't pop off in one night. They didn't pop off
Yeah.
in 5. Some time for these things to grow and stick and figure out what's really working, what your audience really likes. And I think that's what the big three found out too early on. Is just at first they were being dubbed this like old man's league. You bring a couple other names in, and you make things a little bit younger, and then you continuously bring in some prominent names and some former superstars, some high lottery draft picks from the NBA. And I think over time, just like we've seen that growth. I don't want to say it peaked, but I think the biggest peak so far within the big three was that 2019 season, the emergence of the expansion teams, or the expansion teams came along. Joe Johnson came into the league and just ran it like nobody else has, won the MVP, won the chip. So I think that was the biggest year. I think the biggest hurdle right now was that COVID year. You know, you're garnering all this interest and
Yeah.
things are picking up, and then COVID pops off and everyone forgets about you for a year. You're not really putting out a lot of content because you're unsure of where you're at with the league.
Yeah.
And like, oh, hey, we're back. You know, it's kind of like a magic act in that sense. So I think there's been a lot of steady growth. I think they kind of had to take a step back in 2021 before they could take another step forward, which I think they did a good job of. I mean, we saw this past year the additions of guys like Michael Beasley and Gerald Green. But the coolest part, I think, has just been the expansion that they're trying to do, the expansion they're trying to do internationally. Like, we've seen the emphasis that they had on international players, and not only bringing other international players where like 3-on-3 is really popular over in Europe and Asia and everywhere else, but also just like getting more people excited about it that aren't just like people within North America. So,
Absolutely.
you know, a lot of growth. I think there's a lot more ideas on the way. I think I'm really excited that Ice Cube just kind of was like, you know, they let go of their CEO and he's like, screw it, let me just be the CEO, because I think for him, he's just been successful at everything he touches. Like everything he does, he's been able to find a way to succeed. And so I think at this point he's like, well, things have been a little rocky. Let me go ahead and be the CEO and make sure this thing really works and pans out the way I want it to.
For sure. For sure. For you, bro, if you could pick anybody that you would like to play in the big three, who would you pick?
Oh man, I'll name a few people. I would have loved to see Kobe. The whole league was Kobe, so I think that's a no-brainer. I would have loved to see Jamal Crawford too, but I remember someone on Twitter asked him like, "Hey, do you want to play in this league?" And he's like, "Nah, I'm good. I like it from afar, but I'm not going to play." And I was like, "All right, fair enough." Some people I'd be super interested in. Dwayne Wade is someone that I was super curious about and interested in. We had a guy on, Robert Height, who played for Tri-State for a couple of years, and he was good friends with Dwayne Wade, and kind of like hinted at times that, you know, Dwayne might be interested in playing in the league or playing somewhere. And then there was I think last year in 2021, they had mentioned that he was thinking about, I think it was Mo Charlo, who actually played at Marquette as well, played with the squad. He was mentioning that like they almost got Dwayne Wade for that TBT team, the Marquette team. So I was like, oh, maybe there's a shot. So I'd love to see Dwayne Wade. And then most recently, like, you know, I know Dwight Howard's going off in Taiwan or whatever, but if the NBA is not like going to show him that love and no team's going to pick him up despite what he's doing and has done over the past couple of years, I think it'd be cool. I think he'd succeed in the big three. The last guy I'll say who he didn't get a chance to was Zach Randolph, who was supposed to be the captain in 2020.
Yeah.
He ended up backing out, but Zebo would have been perfect for the league.
Oh man, I love Zebo. That would have been so fun to see him play, bro. Because he was supposed to play with Tri-State, right?
He's going to play with Trilogy, actually.
Oh, and that's what I meant. Yeah, Trilogy. Yeah.
Have a nice little squad, I think. So it's unfortunate, but it's one of those what ifs.
Yeah, for sure. For you, bro, like I know you, like we said, we're both in the podcast lane. What has been like kind of some of the ups and downs that you've dealt with, you know what I mean, as far as this podcast game? Because, you know, I'm pretty sure we both can agree, like reaching out is not always the best part, you know, because you may not always get a response. You might always get the runaround. What has been some of the highs and lows for you that you've learned like in this podcast lane so far?
Yeah, I mean, I still deal with that, I feel like. And it's rewarding when you do take that person down and finally get them on. These guys are busy, so you understand that. I think the hardest part has been, just the learning curve. I mean, I knew a little bit about like what the podcast entailed, but I didn't necessarily know all the technicalities from it, what I was going to know and how I was going to grow from a marketing perspective and things like that. I think the other aspect is that I'm in a niche league. So, you know, I've only covered niche leagues. So how do I continue to expand upon that? Like I was pretty like, I kind of got a little bit of beginner's luck because in the last league I was covering in the AAF, you know, there were cities tied to the team. So it was a little bit easier to garner interest. Like it was a lot, like where I'm at with, I feel like my podcast, that was right off rip the first season because one, people love football, but two, you had a city tied to it. So it was a little bit easier. It's like all the people that were in Atlanta that loved Atlanta football, you know, you do that. So, but, you know, just being in a niche league, figuring out ways how to grow. And then actually, I'll even add this point, building credibility, you know, like getting people to trust you and understand that, like, at the end of the day, yeah, we want you on our show. Yeah, we want our podcast to grow, obviously. But also, too, like, you know, we're thinking about different ways that we can bring awareness to your game and what you're doing.
Yeah.
Now, we're not just in this for our best interest. It's a mutual partnership relationship that we want to build because we feel like more people should know your story truthfully, right, and accurately. So just building credibility, earning that trust, and showcasing like, hey, I'm not just another person here trying to look for the next clip. I'm not going to ask you some wild ass question, right? I'm really truly like just want to showcase people your story, and also I want to learn about your story. I'm
Yeah.
curious about it. How did you get to this point, and what are you trying to do in the future with this?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that credibility has been huge and rewarding, right? Like when you have a big guest on it, it's dope, and they say like, you know, I had a good time on the show, or great questions you asked. Like that's a rewarding feeling. So
For sure. For sure. What has been like some of your favorite ones that you've done? You know what I mean? And who is somebody that you really want to have on your show that you haven't got yet?
ooh, who I haven't had on my show. I'm just gonna say this. I don't know if you'll ever see this, but someone I've been chasing down for a while. And I know he's a busy guy, but I'd love to have Glenn Rice Jr. on.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
We've been trying to get that to work, but he's a busy dude, so I'd love to have Glenn Rice Jr. on. I'd also love to have on. Man, that's a good question. I think someone like Leandro Barbosa would be sick. Love to have like White Mamba on because he's got an interesting take playing in the league and then covering the league from a broadcast perspective.
For sure.
So I think those would be cool. Steven Jackson would be a cool one. I'd be a little intimidated by Stack, but he would keep it on. He would keep it 100. So that's the part I appreciate.
Yeah.
Let me think. My favorite ones, Rick Barry has to be one of my favorite ones because he's another guy that just keeps it real and honest and just like really good like back and forth. So
he speaks on different eras too, bro. Like he's been around the game for like I don't know how long exactly, but it's been 30, 40. You know, he's been around the game a lot, man.
He's so knowledgeable, and I just found it so interesting. Like when we talk about like he talked a little bit about like what he would be able to do in this era if he had all the resources that other people like the players have today. So that was really cool, I would say. And then there's another one that I really liked. I'm trying to think. There's been so many other cool. Nancy Lieberman was really cool hearing her story. You know, just her background, how she got to this point, what she's been able to accomplish, and the barriers she's been able to break. Just like really riveting. Honestly, sits with you. And
have you had ISO Joe on there?
So interesting story about Joe. I've met him twice in person. So I guess if you classify those interviews as having him on the pod, sure. But I was sad when he ended up leaving the league because I was like, this is like a yearly tradition that I've been doing. It's like I've been seeing Joe at these events and getting like an interview. I didn't get to do it this year because he ultimately ended up. So I've talked to Joe a couple times. Cool dude. I would love to have Joe on. I know Joe's not a huge podcast guy.
Yeah.
But I'd love to have him on. Richard Lewis would be cool too. And I also wanted to mention that one of my other favorites is probably Mario Chalmers, one I did pretty recently. Just I don't know. I just feel like he's a legend, and I don't think he gets enough respect for what he's accomplished career, not only professionally but collegiately as well. Sure. So it was an honor to have him on too.
For sure. Now, for you, like, do you go often to because I know usually the Big Three is like every week it's a different city. You know, have you been able to attend like most of them? You know, because I know this last few years due to COVID, like they all be in certain cities for multiple weeks. Have you been able to really get to all the ones that you want to get to really connect?
Yeah, it's tough.
yeah, for sure.
Like, I would love to go to more games, but flights were also costing a fortune. But when I got the opportunity, I had a really good connection with one of the guys that used to work there. Mm-hmm. So I got an opportunity in Atlanta to be part of the media when they were still doing the press conferences. And that was honestly like a nerve-wracking feeling too, standing up in front of a bunch of people that do this for a living and asking questions to these guys, asking questions to Lisa Leslie. That was pretty nuts. So I got to go to one in Atlanta, year 3. 2021 and year 4, I got to go to Vegas, and that was pretty cool. Just like it was a little bit more low key, you know, like the league was still trying to like pop off again and gain that interest. And got to do my first in-person interview with Kevin Murphy, who was MVP this past year, and just another down to earth dude that's like willing to come on the show. So that was a really cool experience. And then went to my first championship this past year because I got to get one in a year if I can. So first championship. got to see the celebrity game in person. Got to see the All-Star game. Like that was a really cool event. That was pretty packed, honestly. Like I think more people, if they're going to go to any game, like be able to go to that championship game. You're going to go to a championship game, All-Star game, and a celebrity game for the price of one,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's pretty dope.
for sure. Last two I got for you, bro. For you, where do you see your podcast? I know you don't want to kind of tell everything, but like for you, how further do you want to see your podcast elevated? What are some of like your goals that you want to take your podcast to the next level with?
And it's a good question. Something I've been kind of thinking about. I think obviously you want to see how you want it to be the biggest and best forever. Because I think at some point, first let me say this. I think the podcast will grow as the league grows,
For
right?
sure.
Like
Oh, for sure.
more
For
people
sure.
gain in the league. Like I think more people will try to look over a podcast and see what's out there, and I think we'll get more listeners that way and continue to build that community. That's the biggest thing for me. How can we build this community and show people like this isn't just another knockoff league or something? Like this is legit. This is real. This is a professional basketball league, and it's cool. So, um, I think in that aspect, I'm trying to deliver different types of contents in different ways, trying to be on more platforms as much as I possibly can, outside of my day-to-day job. Um, but honestly, like in terms of goals, like a couple different ways I look at it. One, if for some reason I was able to attain some kind of job, like other job, because I'm doing this podcast and because it was doing well enough, that'd be cool. The other aspect is I would love if the league ever reached out and was like, not necessarily like, hey, can we have your podcast? Or do you want your podcast to be tied to the league as like the league
Like
presented podcast?
bring you in.
Yeah, like a flagship product
Mhm.
essentially. But more so like I think it'd be cool if they were just like, hey, you want to we'll fly you out to a few games. You want to create a little bit of content, interview a few people, and do a little things, from our end. Like that would be the ultimate goal for me because I did used to want to be like the big three podcast. Like I was like, is there potentially a pathway to do that? But that mindset changed actually in 2021. I had a conversation with David Hawkins, who been in the league for a long time, and I had posted something about because this is what in 2021 they had knocked off like 4 teams. They had cut like 4 teams off, and it was going to be like 8 teams the rest of the way or something like that. And I posted something where I was like, oh well, I guess like I was like Three's Company and another team. They both had 2 wins along with like some of the teams that were still in it, and I was, or maybe they had 3 wins, something like that. But essentially, the premise here is that like two of like the 4 teams that were knocked off still had a playoff chance technically, like technicality was,
Mhm.
and I put that on my story. And I got reached out to by the league, like, hey, maybe can you take this down? Like, this is not a good look for us. And like, it kind of annoyed me a little bit. I'm like, I don't work for you guys. You guys aren't paying me to do this. Like, let me post what I want to. But I was like, out of respect for my former co-host worked for the league and just the league in general, sure I'll do it. And I got a call, or David Hawkins had reached out to me. We talked on the phone for a little bit, and it was just a really cool conversation. But in the middle of all that, he was just kind of like, you should put that back up. You're essentially kind of like the voice of the players, right? Like you're your own outlet. You're the voice of the players, and that made me like feel pretty good because I was like, wow, some of these guys actually respect what I'm doing and appreciate
Mhm.
what I'm doing more. And I want to be able to continue to hold on to like the ownership of my podcast and be that outlet if need be, right? Like I'm not saying I'm going to sit here and create some kind of players union, which
Yeah.
players talk about, but talk about doing themselves. But I do like that I can be an outlet and players can come on and say what they want if they really wanted to say whatever they want about the league. Like that's more than fine. I had Rashad McCants on one time, and he mentioned some things like, yeah, I was supposed to have a team in year 3, but ICU didn't let me. Like,
Yeah.
that's cool. Like, I want you to be able to say what you want. This is an open platform for you to be able to speak your mind. I'm not trying to, censor you in any way. So,
For sure.
um, I think in that regard, that's why I don't necessarily want to be like a podcast tied to them. But if they, flew me out to a couple of games and had me do some interviews or something, that'd be dope.
For sure. Okay. I think the last one for you, bro, is like for anybody that maybe wanted to start a podcast or, is kind of hesitant about it, what would be some like healthy knowledge that you would share with them to let them know, as far as getting started, or even taking that step and getting started and continuing to keep doing it?
Yeah, I would say, like anything, do your research first. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of different ways to be able to do a podcast. What I love about podcasting is you can do it in so many different ways. Like even right now, doing it on Instagram Live, like there's so many different ways to be able to go out there and start a podcast. So I think that's cool. So just do your research, you know,
Mm-hmm.
on what you might need and the best way for you to be able to do it within your day to day. Say the second aspect of it is just be passionate about what you're doing, right? Like really enjoy what you're doing. I know that sounds super cliche, but like seriously, like if you're dreading doing this stuff, like because there's sometimes, and I'm sure you've experienced this, where you've had hard days and you've already committed to this podcast, you've already had this guest on, but you're holding yourself accountable, and you're like, man, you know, like I really do just want to rest. Like maybe I should just try to reschedule. Like
Yeah.
but you know, you just can't do that because someone else is taking the time out of their day after you had already asked them. Like, hold yourself accountable. Within that same regard, though, if you don't really like what you're doing, you're not passionate about what you're talking about, and the people that are coming on, it's gonna be you're gonna have that mindset all the time, you know, and then it's just gonna be more of a chore than it is like a passion or a hobby. So just be passionate about what you're doing. Like for me, I really love basketball. I really love being able to expose guys on a different level that don't get enough recognition. It, it's rewarding. And so, you know, whatever the case may be for you, you talk to a lot of different players. You're giving people like myself that in the podcast game, and you just get a chance to hear different people's stories. Like, you know, you're giving people a platform for that, and I think it's much appreciated. And you seem really passionate about what you're doing as well. I've seen the growth that you've made in terms of the content you're putting out, the type of podcast you're doing, the different platforms you're putting on, starting a whole Instagram page for your podcast. You know, so you know, those are things that come with a little bit of passion because you like what you're doing. So, yeah, cliche, but just be passionate about what you're talking about, and I think the rest will take care of itself.
For sure, for sure. Man, my guy, I thank you, taking time out, to really talk about, you and the big three and what you're doing with your platform. Like I said, I watch different podcasts to really know, what I can work on, what I can do differently. And yours is definitely something that I watch and learn from. So, I thank you, for what you're doing. I learned from you, and all the best to you. Hopefully we'll run into each other because I'm always at the big three. Um,
Yeah, one of these days we will for sure,
for sure.
no doubt. And I appreciate the support. Likewise, man. I'm trying to tap into every Instagram live I can for the longest amount of time because I enjoy the different stories and different personas you're bringing on. So, you know, just like you, keep going, continue to learn from each other. I hope we run into each other one of these days.
Oh,
Next
we
year we'll
will,
try to lock it down and just keep doing your thing, bro. I appreciate it.
for sure. All right, my guy, I'll talk to you. All love to you.
See you, bro.